How do you explain your blood at the scene of a killing that happened 34 years ago? That is the question detectives put to a calm, soft-spoken man in his early 70s as he sat across from them in a small interview room in Florida. They told him plainly that blood recovered from the body of a woman murdered in 1991 had been matched to him through modern forensic testing. He blinked, shook his head, and insisted he had no idea who the woman was. He could not begin to imagine how anything of his could end up tied to a crime he swore he never committed. "There has to be more to this," he kept saying, "because I didn't do it." And yet the science in front of the detectives told a story he refused to accept. The story began on a September morning in 1991 when investigators in a quiet central Florida town were called to a disturbing scene. A woman's body had been discovered outdoors, left exposed near a roadside field. Almost immediately, the detectives understood they were not looking at a robbery or some random burst of street violence. The victim had been stabbed more than a dozen times, and experts estimated she had already been dead close to a full day before anyone found her. The number of wounds spoke loudly. This was not a quick, panicked attack by a stranger trying to grab a purse and run. The repeated stabbing pointed to fury, to something intensely personal, to a rage that had to be aimed at someone the killer knew. Crime scene technicians gathered every scrap of evidence they could, sealing away samples that included biological material and blood. Detectives chased leads, questioned anyone who might have known the victim, and tried every avenue available to them. But the year was 1991, and the tools they needed simply did not exist yet. Genetic testing was crude and limited. There were no sprawling DNA databases, no genealogy techniques capable of building a family tree from a single sample, no way to squeeze a usable profile out of the evidence sitting in the storage boxes. So the case slowed, then stalled, then went cold. Detectives retired, leads evaporated, and public attention drifted elsewhere. For the woman's family, though, the pain never faded. Her young son, only 8 years old when she was taken, grew into adulthood without ever knowing who killed his mother or why. The evidence, however, never went anywhere. It sat preserved in sealed containers, waiting. And in 2025, a new generation of investigators reopened the file with technology the original detectives could only have dreamed about. Using advanced DNA analysis combined with forensic genealogy, they returned to the old blood samples and built a complete genetic profile from material that had once seemed useless. That profile pointed to a name no one had ever connected to the case before, a man who had lived quietly for decades and had never appeared on any list of suspects. To be certain, detectives quietly watched him for a time. They followed him, waited, and eventually recovered a discarded item he had used and tossed aside. They sent it to the lab, and when the results came back, every marker lined up. The blood from 1991 belonged to him. When they finally brought him in, they read him his rights and began with easy questions about his past. He answered patiently, describing a life that had carried him from Ohio to Illinois and finally to Florida sometime in the mid-1980s. He talked about factory work, about a stint cleaning laundry at a theme park, about years spent as a maintenance mechanic. He mentioned a marriage in his 60s, a wife he had met at a Christmas party, 2 stepchildren he was fond of. He came across as gentle and ordinary, a man who attended recovery meetings and had stayed sober for nearly 4 years after a frightening stretch that nearly cost him his wife. He admitted to a long history with alcohol and to occasional cocaine use on weekends decades earlier, sometimes heavy enough that whole nights slipped away from his memory. Those gaps, the detectives knew, might explain why a man could forget certain things. But they also knew that no amount of blackout could explain blood. The lab had calculated the odds. The chance that the match between his DNA and the crime scene was simply a coincidence came out at more than 1 trillion to 1. As one detective put it, there are not even 1 trillion people on the planet, so there was no escaping the number. Blood, the detective told him, is better than a fingerprint, much better. And no matter how many times the man repeated that he understood what they were saying but knew nothing about the woman, the figure did not move. The detectives never raised their voices. They spoke gently, leaning forward, telling him they did not believe he was a monster. They had interviewed killers before, they said, and he did not strike them as one of them. That, they explained, was exactly why they wanted him to tell them what had happened, so the family could finally understand the why after living with the what for more than 3 decades. He would not give them that. Over and over, he returned to the same wall. He did not know her. He had never met her. He could not say how his blood ended up on a stranger. The detectives showed him photographs, including images of the victim as she had been found. They pointed out the number of wounds and explained that a crime like this, with so many strikes, almost always meant the killer and the victim knew each other. A stranger does not linger to stab someone 17 times, they said. A stranger wants to get away. This kind of violence comes from feeling, from grievance, from a connection gone wrong. They also believed she had not died where she was discovered. The roadside field looked too clean for that, as though her body had been carried there and left after the fact, which suggested someone had thought about what to do next. Throughout the long conversation, the man stayed strangely composed. He did not shout or weep or pound the table. He sat with his hands folded, answering in the same even tone whether the question was about his recovery or about the most damning evidence in the room. To the detectives, that flat calm was not a sign of innocence. They had seen it before, a kind of psychological barrier that comes up under pressure. They tried to reach behind it, asking about his childhood, about why he had started drinking in the first place. He spoke of always feeling like an outsider, of being the boy who got picked on, of losing his mother young and never feeling like he belonged. He recited the steps of his recovery program from memory, talking about powerlessness and surrender and making amends. One detective pointed out that he had repaired so much of his life, mended so many broken pieces, yet there was still this one thing left unaddressed. The man shook his head. "I have no amends to make here," he said. "I didn't do it." In the end, he was arrested and formally charged in connection with the 1991 killing, the first time in over 30 years that the case had a named suspect in custody. Prosecutors filed counts that included murder and the mistreatment of a body. Even after the handcuffs, his answer never changed. When detectives pressed him on the simplest version of the question, asking how on earth his blood could be on the victim, all he could offer was that he did not know. And a detective warned him gently that "I don't know" is not the same as "I don't remember." People forget things, the detective said, but blood does not transfer across a room. Blood gets onto another person through close physical contact. 17 wounds from a knife means the attacker was right up against the victim, close enough to be cut in the struggle, close enough for their blood to mix with hers. That mixture was exactly what the lab had found. So the case now rests on a strange and unsettling contrast. On one side sits an aging man with a quiet life, a recovered drinker who cares for his family and goes to his meetings, a man who looks nothing like the picture most people carry of a killer. On the other side stands a brutal, deeply personal crime that froze in time for 34 years until science finally caught up to it. His first court date is still ahead of him, and the woman's son, now grown with a family of his own, may at last learn the truth. The real question lingers long after the interview ends. Can a person truly bury the memory of something this violent beneath decades of addiction and time? Or is he simply refusing to face what the evidence has already made clear?